What's up, it's Leaferton. I made the video all AxePvP techniques in Minecraft, which was a demonstration of like the majority of AxePvP techniques you can use, and was actually inspired by Late to Fall's Sword PvP guide. So I heard my buddy SHADOWCLOAK and EZDUCK are making a newer and better version, and I'm just here to say that I approve of this tutorial, and yeah, enjoy.
Hi, I'm EZDUCK. I'm currently ranked high tier 3 in Axe, and I've been part of the community for about a year. I'm a former Axe tester of the month and current senior Axe tester. In this tutorial, several experienced Axe players will cover every single technique. Without further ado, let's get started.
This video will be divided into two sections. The first section involves techniques relating to dealing damage to your opponent, while the second section involves techniques relating to baiting your opponent. All of these techniques will be showcased with a demonstration to ensure you are clear on how to perform each strategy when the time comes.
My name is Eratak. I'm currently ranked low tier 3 in AxePvP. Although I was not ranked until a few years ago, I've been playing the Axe game mode for many years now, so I have gained quite some experience in this game mode. In this subsection, I'll be covering techniques relating to auto hits, backstabs, and bows. The first technique is the most basic that you need to know in AxePvP, auto hits. Auto hits are performed when you just try to punish someone for breaking your shield carelessly. This can be done by spam clicking your mouse while holding your shield, and when your opponent breaks your shield without proper spacing, your weapon can damage them. You can either normal click or butterfly kick when spamming the clicks. Okay, the next technique is the backstab. Backstabs are performed when you get a quick hit on your opponent in order to catch them off guard. There are multiple versions of the backstab, including critical hit, swishi, momentum swishi, and the triangle. The first version of the backstab we're covering is the critical hit, the classic one. This is done by jumping behind your opponent quickly and landing a critical hit, usually dealing 2 hearts of damage. The second version of the backstab we're covering is the swishi. Popularized by the player swishi, this can be done by quickly strafing behind your opponent and quickly sprint hitting them. This type of backstab is extremely hard to block, so if done right, you will easily be able to get the upper hand in any game. The third version of the backstab we'll be covering is the momentum swishi. Similar to the swishi, this is done by sprint hitting your opponent from behind. However, this technique is different as it requires you to have momentum built from running and requires you to jump through or around the opponent in order to get the hit. This is a very hard technique to master. The final version of the backstab we'll be covering is a triangle backstab. This is usually performed to trick your opponent into thinking that you are going to do a critical hit backstab, but instead you turn the other way. This is done by strafing in one direction, then quickly strafe to the opposite direction, and then landing a critical hit. This backstab works because it baits the opponent into facing the direction you initially strafe towards, which leaves their backside open for you to land a critical hit. Moving on to bow techniques. First up is the critical shot strategy. This is done when you wait for your opponent to shoot you with a non-fully charged arrow, and in return, you quickly fire your arrow. Your arrow will deal more damage than your opponent because you waited longer to charge your bow before shooting. The second bow technique is the half-charge shot. This can be done 2 ways. The first way is spamming half-charge arrows to escape situations in which you are low on health, and the second is when you spam half-charged arrows to mess up your opponent's aim while both of you are in a bow exchange. The final bow technique is the bow rod. In Minecraft version 1.8, the fishing rod was used to knock the opponent back to start a combo with the sword. The bow rod is basically the same thing, but with a bow, obviously. So to perform this technique, shoot a half-charged arrow at your opponent. When your opponent is knocked back by the arrow, use your sword to combo them or spam critical hits. Keep in mind that this technique works best on lower ping players, as higher ping players tend to not take as much knockback due to lag.
Hi, I'm Nighteries. I've been playing the Axe game mode for many years, and I am currently ranked high tier 3. In this subsection, I'll be covering techniques relating to crossbows and cooldowns. The next technique is the cooldown trick. While some new generation players may think this is a new strategy, this is a fairly old technique discovered by VectorFlame. The cooldown trick is performed when you want to crit someone out with the sword and your opponent raises their shield. You don't want to waste the sword's cooldown to continue with the combo. To perform this, break your opponent's shield with your axe, then quickly switch to the sword to continue or start a combo. These are 3 important techniques within the crossbow section, with the offhand crossbow being the first. This technique is performed when you estimate your opponent is at 1.5 hearts or lower, and you want to have an almost guaranteed win. To do this, simply offhand your crossbow into your shield slot, then click the left and right buttons on your mouse while aiming close at your opponent. The second technique within the crossbow section is the quick crossbow. This is performed when you want to maximize the amount of crossbow shots you can shoot in the shortest time. To do this, start by loading your crossbow, and when you reach the third loading animation, immediately shoot your crossbow. This timing takes time to master, and one tip is to watch your crossbow loading animation while loading it to get the right timing. The third and final crossbow technique is the crossbow rod. This technique is similar to the bow rod, but you use your crossbow to shoot the opponent instead of a half-charged bow shot.
My name is Kier, and I have been playing the Axe game mode for many years, and through intense training arcs, I was able to improve quickly to obtain my current tier of low tier 3. In this subsection, I will be covering techniques relating to momentum breaks. The next set of techniques is the momentum break. Momentum breaks are the most useful strategy in any shield game mode, and these are usually performed when you want to disable your opponent's shield without getting knocked far back by their auto hit. To perform the momentum break, the concept is to charge at your opponent with the momentum built up and break the opponent's shield, typically following up with some sort of attack. It is important to gain momentum by sprinting forwards to ensure you take a reduced knockback from the opponent's auto hit. There are multiple ways to perform a momentum break. The following is a demonstration of a player using only an axe to perform a momentum break on their opponent. This is typically followed by an axe critical hit. Like this version, for the following two versions of the momentum break, notice how the performer puts their shield up in case the opponent auto hits the momentum break, and the performer does not want to take any damage. This type of momentum break is recommended if your opponent tends to run when you try to use your sword to combo them, as the axe crit will maximize the damage you deal before your opponent runs. This is a demonstration of a player using an axe then switching to a sword through the cooldown trick to perform a momentum break on their opponent. This is typically followed by a sword critical hit combo or sword sprint hit combo. This is a demonstration of a player initially using a sword, then switching from an axe to a sword through the cooldown trick to perform a momentum break on their opponent. This is a demonstration of a player using only an axe to perform a momentum break on their opponent. This is typically followed by an axe critical hit. Like this version, for the following two versions of the momentum break, notice how the performer does not put their shield up, and the performer will sacrifice some damage for reduced knockback. This sacrifice is necessary when your shield is disabled and you want to perform a momentum break. This is a demonstration of a player initially using an axe then switching to a sword through the cooldown trick to perform a momentum break on their opponent. A shield is not used in this version. This is a demonstration of a player initially using a sword then switching from an axe to a sword through the cooldown trick to perform a momentum break on their opponent. A shield is not used in this version.
Yo, I'm Newtronn. I'm currently ranked high tier 3 in AxePvP. I've been playing the game for quite a long time and I have a lot of experience in it. In this subsection, I will be covering techniques relating to P-crits and stuns. The first technique is a P-crit or punish crit, and this is performed when your opponent hits you with a sprint or critical hit without backing up in time. To do this, after your opponent hits you, simply land a critical hit on your opponent once you hit the ground, hence the word punish. The next technique is the P-crit walk. Sometimes you don't need to wait for your opponent to hit you without backing up in time to perform a P-crit. In a P-crit walk, you instead run towards your opponent, baiting them into hitting you. Once you're hit and in the air, you can then perform a P-crit. The next set of techniques is the stun. The stun is probably the most important technique in any shield game mode, invented by Womp and popularized by Swipe. A stun is performed when you want to disable your opponent's shield without getting hit by their auto hit, and this requires you to space accordingly. Currently there are 5 versions of the stun, first being the classic shift stun. To do this, click both left and right click to raise your shield while shifting and strafing back. Make sure to strafe out of your opponent's reach or else they'll be able to hit you. The second version of the stun is the sidestep stun. To do this, when you're in a shield encounter, quickly unshield and strafe to your opponent's side. After that, quickly insta-shield to disable their shield while spacing out to avoid getting hit. The third version of the stun is the side-to-side stun. To do this, when you are in a shield encounter, quickly unshield and strafe to your opponent's side. After that, quickly strafe back to the opposite side of the direction you initially strafed towards. Once you have done that, insta-shield and stun as normal, while spacing accordingly. The fourth version of the stun is the diagonal stun. To do this, when you're in a shield encounter, strafe forwards into the side of your opponent, aka strafing diagonally. Once you are far enough, quickly strafe backwards into the opposite side of where you originally strafed towards. Once you have done that, insta-shield and then stun. The fifth version of the stun is stunning without your shield off of cooldown. This is usually performed when your shield has been disabled and you want to stun back. To do this, break your opponent's shield while strafing backwards in one direction. This stun can be hard to pull off if your opponent is moving forward, as it will be able to reach you and easily hit you if you don't space your stun carefully.
My name is Malbergon. I'm currently ranked low tier 3 in the Axe game mode. I'm very familiar with pretty much every single Axe technique, and I have lots of experience in game sense. In this subsection, I will be covering techniques related to shams, swords, and using the axe to combo. The next set of techniques is the sham, originally called the trick crit by Swite. A sham is performed when you want to win an encounter, usually during a P-crit exchange, or just trying to get a last hit in the encounter. There are 5 versions of the sham, the first being the critical hit. To perform this, after your opponent hits you and then puts their shield up, jump behind them like you would do when performing a backstab and land a critical hit. The second version of the sham is the swishi. To perform this, after your opponent hits you and then puts their shield up, jump behind them like you would do when performing a swishi and land a sprint hit. The fourth version of the sham is the momentum swishi. To perform this, after your opponent hits you and then puts their shield up, jump behind them like you would do when performing a momentum swishi and land a sprint hit. The fifth version of the sham is the sprint hit. This version of the sham is done when your opponent does not put their shield up after hitting you. To perform this, after your opponent hits you without putting their shield up, sprint hit them so they are knocked backwards, thus giving you the final hit in the encounter. This next technique is about countering any version of the sham except the sprint hit sham. To perform this, after you have hit your opponent and put up your shield, you predict that your opponent is gonna sham you, so you quickly weak hit them with your axe to throw them off and prevent a sham from being done on you. The final set of techniques that deal with damage is the sword. There are 5 ways to utilize the sword in the Axe game mode. The first way is the sword crit combo, aka the sword main. This is performed by repeatedly landing critical hits on your opponent with your tiny sword. The second way to utilize the sword is the sword sprint combo. This is done by repeatedly landing sprint hits on your opponent using W taps, S taps, or a mixture of both to keep your opponent knocked away from you. The third way to utilize the sword is the sword sprint combo with the shield. This is done the same way as the sword sprint combo, but you have to put up your shield after each hit. This method is useful when your opponent has a crossbow or a bow shot ready, and you don't want to risk breaking the sword combo because you have been shot. The fourth way to utilize the sword is the sword uppercut combo. This is done the same way as the sword sprint combo, but you have to jump during each hit. The final way to utilize the sword is the sword uppercut combo with the shield. This is done the same way as the sword uppercut combo, but you have to put up your shield after each hit, like the sword sprint combo with the shield. The final technique in the list of strategies relating to damage dealing is the weak hit combo, popularized by Westcox. This method involves you repeatedly weak hitting your opponent with your axe to draw off their aim and chip away small amounts of health. It is extremely important to have good spacing and strafe unpredictably to pull off this technique successfully without getting hit.
Greetings Earthlings, I am Insanel, and I will talk about the Chingwok Salad Tosser. It is an AxePvP tactic that consists of a 360-degree spin followed up with a backstab. The spin can confuse your opponent, making them think that you are turning around to run away, giving you enough time to gain forward momentum for a successful backstab. It also makes it more difficult for your opponent to decide which direction to block your backstab from. The Chingmok Salad Tosser is best applied in situations where neither player is willing to make a move, like a shield standoff, where both players are low on health. It is not recommended to perform this tactic too often in one duel because your opponent will be able to predict it and attack you during your backstab. In these scenarios, you can perform the Chingmok bait, which consists of only a spin, after which you raise your shield once more in order to bait your opponent into activating your auto hit. Keep in mind that the Chingmok Salad Tosser is difficult to perform because you need to have good aim and enough computer mouse space for a total of 540 degrees of movement.
Hi, my name is X. I have gained a lot of experience in game sense through my multiple years of experience in AxePvP. The second section of this tutorial covers bait techniques and everything related to baiting your opponent. The first set of bait techniques are related to using the crossbow. There are currently 4 ways to use the crossbow to bait your opponent. First being the crossbow timing bait. This bait is done when you want to trick your opponent into being impatient and putting their shield down carelessly. To perform this bait, start by loading your crossbow while your opponent is charging at you. After your crossbow is loaded, do not shoot immediately and tuck it away, as your opponent will most likely be holding their shield and waiting for your shot. Instead, wait until your opponent becomes impatient and unshields, in which you can shoot your crossbow. The second way to use your crossbow to bait your opponent is by fake loading the crossbow. There are 3 forms of crossbow loading baits, and these are performed when you want to dodge your opponent's arrow or want to throw off their aim. The first form of crossbow loading baits requires you start loading your crossbow, but you quickly move away to another direction and then load. This will most likely bait your opponent to shoot at the spot where you were originally instead of the spot that you just moved to. The second form of crossbow loading baits requires you to start loading your crossbow, but you quickly sprint, not move, to another direction. The difference between this bait and the one before is that you don't stop to load your crossbow. Instead, you will keep sprinting away. This is only performed when you know your opponent is expecting you to perform the first form of the crossbow bait and is waiting for you to move away to load your crossbow. This bait tricks the opponent into trying to shoot you because they think you will stop to load your crossbow after moving away, but they will miss since you won't be stopping at all to load. The final form of crossbow loading baits requires you to start loading your crossbow and then you quickly shield while pulling out your sword to hit the approaching opponent. This bait is performed when you are loading your crossbow, but you see that your opponent is charging towards you, and you know that you won't be able to load your crossbow in time for you to dodge the opponent's hit. If done successfully, this bait will most likely trick your opponent into breaking your shield instead of hitting you while you're loading the crossbow. Keep in mind to use a sword instead of an axe, as the sword has a faster cooldown. The next bait is the dream bait, which is one of the original baits invented in the Axe game mode. Popularized by the player Dream, this bait involves you dealing damage to your opponent and then turning around to run. However, just when your opponent thinks you're going to run away, you quickly turn back around to hit them. This bait will most likely catch your opponent off guard and they will not have enough time to react to your hit. The next bait is the fake dream bait, which is a modified version of the dream bait. Similarly, this bait involves you dealing damage to your opponent and then turning around to run. However, when you turn back and face your opponent to get ready to hit them, you turn back around to run. After that, immediately turn back to do a dream bait. This bait involves faking a dream bait and then doing the real dream bait. This bait is performed when you think your opponent is expecting a dream bait from you and they are holding their shield when you turn back for the first time.
My name is Duelingo. I am 13 years old. I am a current tier tester in Axe and ranked low tier 3. Through my many years of playing Axe, I have gained a lot of experience and knowledge of the game mechanics. In this last subsection, I will be covering bait techniques related to spacing and shield mechanics. The next bait technique is the fake out. This bait requires you to hold S to back up and trick your opponent into trying to reach out to hit you. Once your opponent misses, take advantage of this opportunity to sprint hit your opponent. The next bait technique is the offhand crossbow. As you can see, this technique not only applies to damage techniques, as it can also be used to bait opponents. This bait involves you getting into the offhand crossbow mode, and you are trying to load your crossbow. When you see your opponent charging at you to hit you, you stop loading your crossbow and use your axe to hit your opponent, throwing them off. This bait works because when you are in offhand mode, loading your crossbow does not reset the cooldown of the weapon in your main hand. The next bait technique is the sham hit bait. The bait requires you to be in a P-crit chain, where you are the last one to be P-critted. After that, your opponent expects you to sham, so they keep their shield up. but you don't move, the bait most likely tricks your opponent into being impatient and unshielding, in which at that moment you will time your hit carefully and sprint hit your opponent. Keep in mind that this bait will only work if your opponent is not performing a sham weak hit counter. The next bait technique is the most basic bait, the shield dance. This bait involves you to quickly shield and unshield around your opponent while spamming let's click. This will most likely cause your opponent to be confused on whether you are trying to perform a backstab or not. Keep in mind to keep your moves unpredictable, or else your opponent will be able to predict your moves and prevent getting baited. The final bait technique is the jump to S-tap. This bait is designed to trick your opponent into charging towards you, but they will miss and you can take advantage of the opportunity to deal damage to them. To do this, start by jumping towards your opponent, then immediately hold S to pull yourself backwards. This will cause you to look like you are jumping towards your opponent. After tricking them to try to reach out to hit you, make sure to do this bait at the correct distance and out of your opponent's reach, or your opponent will still be able to reach out to hit you.